Hello everyone, welcome to another talk. It will be our last talk for this month, the month of May. Today our talk will be a casual chat with Eric Broug about his new book, Architecture of the Islamic World. Let me, before introducing our guests for today, Eric Broug is an architect. I'm happy to have him with us. He's an architect, he's an author, educator, and an artist. He's an expert in Islamic geometric design. Today he will be telling us about his new book, Architecture of the Islamic World. Our moderator for today is Miss Nima Harris. Nima is an architect and the design director of M&I Associates, an Imperial design company here in Qatar. So before starting and giving the talk to Nima, I want to remind you that our talk will be live streaming on Facebook. It will be recorded also. I want to ask all the attendees to just be in mute during the presentation of artist Eric. Sorry, he's not an architect, he's an artist. Just be mute during his presentation, and we'll open the floor after that for your question. Nima, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Slim. Welcome to the attendees. Good evening, all. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our event tonight. It's so wonderful to have such a diverse range of audience brought together by the shared interest in Islamic art and architecture. Our speaker for today is an author, educator, artist who specialized in Islamic geometric design. He has an MA degree in History of Islamic Art and Architecture from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He's active in the field of Islamic geometric design for over 25 years and is one of the world's leading experts in the field. Being passionate about the creative and educational opportunities that the design tradition offer to a wide range of population, he trains others in art, conducts workshop globally, and has authored highly revered book like Islamic Geometric Patterns. Now, one common problem most of the designers, including me, encounter while researching for the project is that most of the general books on Islamic art and architecture are 70% art and 30% architecture, and only covers a very small region. But the good news here is, our speaker today is currently writing a book on architecture on the Muslim world, and it will be global in its scope, written for architects and designers. In his topic today, he will update how the work is progressing on the book, what the book is about, what are the challenges he faced during the writing. So let me invite our speaker for today, Mr. Eric Broug. Good evening.
Thank you, Nima.
It's my privilege to welcome you to start your presentation. Over to you, Eric, and attendees, please keep your mic in mute and you will have a chance to speak after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nima. Thank you for the introduction. Also, thank you to my friends at the Architects Hub Qatar for inviting me. For me, it's really nice to be in the position to talk about my book. I've been working on this book now for 6 months, or we signed the contract 6 months ago, so it's been non-stop for me. But also because of lockdown, there's not a lot of opportunity to engage. So this is really the first opportunity for me to show you what I've been doing so far and to get some feedback. So that's what I hope to get out of it, really. So, I mean, we've described this event this evening as a chat rather than me just talking. So keep that in mind, because I'm very keen to get your candid feedback. Yeah, just tell me what you think. So, like Nima said, I'll talk a little bit about the book, about the process, how it came about, and the considerations that I'm making and have made so far in working on this book. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared a little presentation just to hopefully delight you with some beautiful photos. but also to show you what I've been doing so far. So, hang on, let me just full size this. So, you'll be seeing a lot of photos with watermarks on it. There's a good reason for that, is because the photos that I'm choosing from commercial photo agencies. So these photos are low res and they've got watermarks, but when they're in the book, they'll be high res, of course. Yeah, so the book I'm writing is for my UK publisher, Thames Hudson. For me, it's a blessing and a privilege to work with them, because they're really one of the best publishers of art books. I've written 3 books with them, and one of the things that's great about them is that they're just as committed as I am to making a book as beautiful and as effective as possible. And this project that we've started on is no different. So I'll be showing you lots of photos, but don't ask me, or don't expect me to tell you every time what the building is. I mean, I do know, but I haven't I haven't put the captions on. Otherwise, it would have taken hours more. This is in Cairo, in any case. So this book came about after I'd written my most recent book with Thames and Hudson, which was a sort of an adult coloring book called Islamic Design Workbook. I love to write, and more than that, I love to explain things. And for me, a book is like creating a physical object. You know, it's the word, it's the text, it's illustrations, and it's how these all work together to make something that is accessible and attractive, and something that enlightens and delights. So that's what writing a book or making a book is all about for me. And after I finished my Islamic Design Workbook, I was already thinking, well, what else could I write? You know, what else can I try and pitch to Thames and Hudson? So I pitched a book to them on Muqarnas, 3-dimensional Islamic geometric design. And they said, well, that's nice, but that's a bit too niche, because a book needs to have wide appeal. Then I pitched a book to them about the drawings of James Wilde, who's this 19th century architect who lived in Cairo and made beautiful drawings, really beautiful watercolor and pencil drawings of Mamluk architecture in Cairo, really fantastic. And it's unpublished, and he, in my mind, his drawings are as important or as beautiful as Owen Wilson's much more famous book, Grammar of Ornament. This guy, James Wilde, was also the brother-in-law of not Owen Wilson, excuse me, Owen Jones. Owen Wilson is a bad actor. So ultimately, I pitched a few things to Thames Hudson. They politely declined, but they then came to me and said, well, have you thought about doing a book about Islamic architecture? And it's funny because sometimes the things that are the most obvious are right under your nose and you don't see them. And then when they suggested it, I thought, yes, of course, that would be a fantastic book to write. It would be, you know, for me, a privilege, like all these books that I write. It's a privilege for me to do that because, you know, it's a great opportunity to create something on a topic that's close to my heart. But also, it'll be really great to write a book on Islamic architecture, because as Nima said in the introduction as well, is that there are quite a few general books on Islamic art and architecture, but art is 70% and architecture is 30%. And not only that, what always really bugs me is that, you know, why is it always only architecture from Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, etc. But why is there never anything about Islamic architecture in sub-Saharan Africa or in Southeast Asia or in Russia or China or Latin America? You know, this is equally interesting to me. And also, why does it stop with the Ottomans and the Qajars? You know, it's not like there wasn't anything that happened after that. So when they suggested a book on Islamic architecture, I thought, yeah, great, but then this is how I want to do it. You know, I want it to be global. And ideally, I would want it to carry on up to the 21st century, because it's so artificial to stop with the Ottomans or the Qajars. You know why? It's not like there's nothing of interest that's been done after that. So I would want to capture that. So the challenge then is, how do you make a book that's not, well, a book can't be infinitely big. You know, there's all sorts of considerations. A book has to be affordable. So in the case of Thames and Hudson, it means it's a book that can't be more than £40 in cost, which means that it can't be bigger than, for example, 300 pages. So when I started, I chose about 750 photos, which is way too much. And ultimately, after all sorts of negotiations and toing and froing, we signed a contract for a book with 350 photos. And the hardest thing, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, the hardest thing is choosing what not to include. That's the horrible bit, because of course there are so many fantastic buildings that I can choose. But if I choose one, it means something else has to go out. So there's always this dilemma, you know, because I'll come across a fantastic building with a fantastic photo and think, okay, I must include this. But if I do that, something else has to be chucked out. So that's the hard part. Okay, so what I thought I would do. So this is the structure of my book. 7 chapters. Well, I won't read it out because you can read it. Covering the globe, and a chapter at the end on the influence of Islamic architecture, because that's also very interesting to my mind, and hopefully you'll agree with me when you see the photos. So I thought, let me just go through these chapters and show you some of the photos that I've chosen so far. It's really just a snapshot, but just to give you a bit of a flavor. So for me, and for the publisher as well, the challenge is always not just to find a photo of a building, but to find a fantastic photo of a building. You know, and that was also my challenge, because nobody needs another book with 10 photos of the Alhambra, you know, because every book on Islamic art and architecture will have that. But equally, I can't, nor would I want to, write a book on this topic without using photos from the Alhambra. So then the challenge is, well, how can I show something that's unusual or that people haven't seen before? And the same is true, for example, for the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. I have to include it, but there's no added value for me to use a photo that people have seen already, or part of the building that people have seen already. I want to try and show it in a different light, really. Okay. And then beyond the chapters, I've got some sections that I've added, and there might be some more sections. So an illustrated glossary, also a section on architect biographies. I mean, a lot of these buildings we don't know who the architects are, but in the cases where we do know, it's really interesting to write about that. And these can be architects in the 13th century, but these can also be architects in the 20th or the 21st century. And then I was working this morning on a section I want to do on women in Islamic architecture, because that's also really interesting. You know, there are quite a lot of, or not a lot, but there are women in the history, in the course of Islamic history, who were patrons of buildings, and quite significant ones. So, for example, in Herat, during the Timurid era, one of the wives of the Timurid ruler, Gauhar Shad, was a patron of mosques and madrasas and khankas. So these are fantastic stories that I really want to include. And the other thing, before I jump in, is that with art books, with illustrated books, like the book I'm writing, with coffee table books, traditionally, and then that's something I'm critical of and want to avoid, is that these books rely very much on text. But in reality, if you buy an art book, what do? You put it on your lap or on the table and you look at the photos. And if you like the photos, you read the captions. And if you like the captions, you read the chapters in that order. And there are very few people that sit down with a big fat art book and start with chapter 1 and start reading. Who does that? So I want to make a book that takes that into consideration, and also that people have a shorter attention span than they used to have. So if I can impart information in smaller chunks, but be more effective by doing so, then I'd rather do it that way. And also a lot of people who in my potential readership don't have English as a first language. So that also means that I want the pictures to do all the heavy lifting, really. Okay, so to start off with chapter 1, Levant and the Gulf region. This is the minaret in Aleppo, which is being rebuilt, hopefully. Picture on the right is a good example of this, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, right? So any book on Islamic architecture will have that, of course, but then I try and find a photo that's exceptional, in my opinion, exceptionally beautiful, and shows detail or shows something that people haven't seen before. So I think so far in the course of research, I must have looked at least 100,000 photos, because that's really the job in the beginning initially, is just to find photos, find great photos. The one on the left I was very happy with when I found that. So that's a wooden panel from Al-Aqsa Mosque from the 8th century. You know, that's also architecture. It's now in a museum, but it's part of the building. So it's, you know, it's absolutely fantastic. So to have that on a page in a book would be great. Picture on the right is Yemen. So sometimes also when I can't find a photo, you know, I'm desperate to have a building in there, but I can't find a good photo, or I can't find a photo at all. The big benefit of the 21st century is that people have good cameras, or they have phones with very good cameras. So for example, the photo on the right by Al-Bara Mansour, he's a guy in Taiz in Yemen, where this building is. And I was looking, because I knew this building existed, but all the photos were just not good enough, not what I wanted. So I looked on Instagram to see who had tagged as a location this mosque, and went through all the photos, came across this photo, went to the guy's Instagram post profile and sent him a message saying, look, your photos are really great. Please tell me they're high resolution. Yeah, so then we emailed, and I'm going to use this photo. He'll get a credit. He'll get a copy of the book. And, you know, it's great, because this is a guy who lives there. It's his, you know, it's his local heritage even, and it's a beautiful photo as well. So basically I'll try and do what it takes to get the photo that I want. This is also on the left. This is where is this? This is the Dar al-Islam, or in Kuwait, I think. Beautiful stained glass window, really fantastic. So it's nice. Then on the right, this is in Oman, thank you. In the mosque, the modern mosque in Oman, and I love this niche. It's really beautiful. It's really nice. So rather than using an obvious photo of this building, I would then rather use this, because the detail is great. But then, of course, I can't use this photo unless I know who the artist is. Otherwise, you know, what's my caption going to be? It's just not, you know, that wouldn't be good enough. So this was quite tricky for me to find out who the artist was of this, of not just of the calligraphy, but of the whole design. So ultimately I did find out, but sometimes that takes a lot of effort. Iran, Iraq, and South Asia. On the left is the Great Mosque of Champaner. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that terribly. In India, Mughal era, absolutely fantastic. It's almost fractal in its design, carved in stone. It's absolutely amazing. And then this fantastic mihrab on the right. I want to try, you know, a book like this has to show the things that people expect to see, of course, because this building, you can't just leave out buildings for you know, without good reason. But for me then to find, for example, this fantastic mihrab on the right, you know, it'll be great to have that on the page. This picture on the left is also in India. I love that detail. You know, it's so worth showing something like that. So the practice here was that there was a channel that went into this pool that you can see in the background, but to slow down the water, they would carve something like this. It's very beautiful, but also very interesting. On the right, a Seljuk minaret. Nice photo. And then Also doing contemporary work. At the top is the Islamic University of Technology in Dhaka in Bangladesh. It's got a different name now, but I love that. I think it's a great building, or at least there's a great detail. The university campus itself is also very impressive, but this is a good photo to use. And then the monument below, very striking building as well. Turkey and Central Asia, building on the left. I just think it's fantastic. I hope to find a slightly better photo because the colors are a bit weird here. So sometimes, and also you can see there's a butane tank in the picture bottom left. So that's not very good. So sometimes photos will be retouched by Thames Hudson when we think, okay, well, it's a fantastic photo, but we don't really want this washing line with laundry in the background, or we don't want this telegraph pole with wires in the foreground. Sometimes we'll have to do something about it. So that's a great building, really a fantastic building, and not very well known. You know, that surprises me. I come across things, I think this is absolutely a knockout. You know, why is this new to me? And not only that, it will be great to present this. Picture on the right is Samarkand, of course. So any book on Islamic art and architecture will have this photo of the Rajasthan and Samarkand, but then I'd rather have a photo that's a bit different. So this photo in the wintertime, I think, is really striking. I really like it. Top left is Ottoman era. So for me, what I want to write a humane book. You know, I really want it to be about the people and the stories behind it, because quite often these books, I mean, I'm an architectural historian, but I just have no time for all these paragraphs of descriptions saying how many bays does this building have and how many arches and buttresses, this and that. That for me, that's not so interesting, especially not if it's page after page of this stuff. So the challenge for me is to find something interesting to write about the building. Quite often it's about who commissioned it, or the context in which it was built, or the area in which it was built. And also with the photo, you know, not every photo has to be devoid of people. It's nice to have that if I find a good photo. So this picture on your top left, I think, is absolutely delightful. And the picture bottom left as well. This is a contemporary mosque in very new, actually, built in Turkey, which I really like. But then the photo on the right, an Ottoman mosque like that, you know, there's many books that have photos like this, but then the challenge for me is to find the best photo there is. So this one is really excellent, I think. So the building top left, I just find absolutely fantastic. It's a mausoleum, also Seljuk. So I found some photos of this building, but none that were really good, none that really showed the building really well. So similarly, I did a search on Instagram to see if anybody had tagged it with a location, and ultimately found this photographer in Turkey who had taken this photo with a drone. So I asked if he had a good photo that I could use, and he has. So great. So we'll use this photo then, because it shows the building perfectly. It shows the features that I want to show, but not via commercial photo agency, but through other means. Picture bottom right I love because look at the scale of it. Look at the size of that minaret. It's absolutely enormous. And it's not even at its full height because a bit has fallen off over time. But if you look at the building at the bottom, I mean, that's a pretty big building itself, but then the minaret just dwarfs it. Africa, so picture left is Kairouan. So that's a building that's in all books on Islamic art and architecture, but then I saw this wonderful photo and I saw it, I thought, great, yeah, I'll use that, you know, because it's also, it tells a story, you know, it's yeah, I love it. Picture on the right is Mauritania. Also a nice photo. Top left is in Algeria. So that's also quite interesting. So this is, I've forgotten the name now, but you know, once you buy my book, you'll know. Le Corbusier was very much influenced by this particular building. and this particular architectural style of this in this part of Algeria. I mean, I just think it's absolutely amazing, this building, with the fluid forms and just the appearance of it. It's really something else. Top right is in Mali. Also a good photo. I like that photo because it also gives context. You know, you can really see this building sitting in the community there. I think it's just, yeah, it's really good. So the two pictures, bottom left and bottom right, Omeima will has helped me with that. So the picture on the left is the well-known mosque in Khartoum, in Sudan, but then on the right is a mini version also in Khartoum, which I like even better, to be honest. And I really want to use it in the book, but I don't really have I have a decent photo, but I need to know who the architect is, otherwise I can't put the photo in because it would look like I haven't done my homework. So if anybody's in this call and they know the story there, then please tell me. But I just love it. I think it's just so good. You know, you can imagine the whole scenario where this big, fantastic, distinctive mosque is being built in Khartoum, and then somebody thinks, oh, that's pretty cool. Let me do a small version of that. Yeah, really, really good. Top right is, I've done a whole story about that. I ended up writing about 1,500 words. It's, what's it called? It's on the west coast of Africa. And it's a very interesting story because it's, well, it's a sad story as well. It has to do with slavery and and such. But this is, what place is it? It's not Côte d'Ivoire. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The story is that the Portuguese came to the west coast of Africa, abducted local African men, took them to Brazil as slaves, where they lived, where they ultimately became, were released, stayed in Brazil, found a trade working as carpenters, as builders, building structures in Brazil in the Portuguese style. At some point, the Portuguese colonial power in Brazil didn't want those originally Africans anymore, because they were Muslim, and the Portuguese Christians were worried that they might be a threat to the stability of their regime. So they sent them all back. So these Africans who'd been away for decades from their country came back, had in the meantime learned how to build in Portuguese style, built a mosque for themselves on the west coast of Africa, and that's it. I'm not exploring. Yeah. So in a nutshell, there's more to it than that. So I just think that's, you know, it's an amazing story. You know, it's so worth telling that. And to me, that's much more interesting than describing the building facade and saying how tall it is and how many towers there are and all that sort of stuff. Bottom left is, interestingly, by Ricardo Bofill, famous modern architect. And it's in Algeria. It's the Hurari Boumediene agricultural village. And I just love it. I mean, you can easily see what his inspiration is, right? You can see this big rectangular thing in the middle, like an Iwan. And then the circles and the squares are also like Iwans. It's very much indebted to Islamic architecture, but it's almost reduced to its most basic shapes. I think it's very effective, and also not very well documented. So that'll be great to have in the book. Europe and Americas, equally interesting. So top left is a 19th century palace, using this whole sort of intersecting arch system like you see in Cordoba. It's almost like something that Escher would have drawn. Bottom left is a monastery in Spain. Coincidentally, the monastery that Columbus was very closely attached to. But if you look at that rosette window, you know, that's a 12-pointed Islamic geometric star pattern. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. And then on the right is the Giralda in Spain. So you can see that the bottom 2/3 of that tower is like something you would see in Morocco. and then later on something was put on top when the Almoravids were no longer in that part of the world. So that sort of evolution of a feature of a building like that, I think, is also very interesting to show. On the left is in San Francisco. It's in the penthouse of the what hotel is that? I forgot now. I've been there. It's yeah. So it's a whole room in the penthouse built in well, indebted to the Persian ceramic embellishment. So it's quite something else. And then the ceiling isn't Persian at all, or the pattern isn't. That's something else. So it's a bit of a mishmash. And then the lamp there is Moroccan, but still, visually, it's really quite something. And the picture on the right is the Fox Theatre in Atlanta, which has been done up as a Nazareth palace, even with a blue star, with a blue ceiling with little stars shining, and turrets and towers and crenellations on the walls, as you can see there. So, and horseshoe arches, of course. Then Europe and US. So top left is the new mosque in Granada, the Mezquita Mayor, which has this fantastic sort of stylized muqarnas ceiling. So that was also something I thought, I really want to use that, but I don't know who's made it. So only yesterday I was in touch with the artist who painted all those little. They're all little cubes. I think it's such a brilliant idea. It's so beautifully executed. Then the picture in the middle, Frank Lloyd Wright, Marin County Civic Center. So he went on a trip to Baghdad and was very much influenced by what he saw there. And I need to find a better photo than this one, actually. But you know, you don't have to look very hard to see the influence. You know, you see the sort of minaret style, the arches, and there's more detail there besides. Picture on the right is in Peru. So also influenced by Mudéjar artists who lived in Spain. And then when the New World was opened up, they, because they were Muslims, they were not allowed to go to South America, but they did anyway, and they established themselves there, and they ended up building a lot. Like you can see, this ceiling here is one of those typical wooden coffered ceilings full of geometric patterns. And then bottom left is Cuba, Havana, with some arches that look like they're from Al-Andalus. China and Southeast Asia. Left here, China, very interesting building, very unusual. On the right is the underground mosque in Indonesia, which is also a very interesting story, which I've tried to write about in a succinct way. Top left is Punchbowl Mosque in Australia. Fantastic building, really amazing with the way they've used traditional elements of mosque architecture, but then like the muqarnas and the dome, but then done it in a contemporary way. It's pretty effective. Picture top right. I'm not sure whether I'm going to use it yet. Maybe it's a bit too jokey, but it's a real building. You know, it's in Malaysia, I think. The Pink Mosque, it's called, predictably. Bottom right is a mihrab in China. Really beautiful. Yeah, you've got that one top left. Yeah, so bottom left is Venice, of course. You can, in this photo, you can see these two buildings, the Doge's Palace on the right, St. Mark's in front. You can see the arches, you can see the way the brickwork is done on the right. That's also a very interesting story, how the influence of Islamic architecture made its way to Venice, how that came about. So that's also worth writing about. Picture on the right. Well, if everybody was unmuted, I'd ask people to have a guess where that was. It's in Dallas. Looks like look like Abbasid Baghdad, right? Yeah, but it's not. It's got beautiful stained glass on the inside. Yeah, so this is a commemorative structure, and it's not specifically related to anything Islamic, but of course it looks like like something you would see in Samara. Influence of, so on the left, it's in Dresden, it's a cigarette factory. So the minaret is the chimney stack, and the dome used to be the staff room. It's a fantastic building, obviously, built by a Jewish gentleman in the 19th century. And funnily enough, it's right next to the railway track. And for many decades, the first thing you would see as you came into Dresden was this building, and in big neon letters it said Salam Alaikum on the side. So because that's the name of the brand of cigarettes that were made there. So that was the the first thing you would see when you arrived in that German city. On the right, I was very happy to find that. It's very interesting to me, these arches. So this is a monastery in Spain, very early. But of course, these intersecting arches, I mean, and the pointed arches as well, is indebted to Islamic architecture. And it's just such an unusual design. It's I think it's very interesting. On the left, you can see also the influence of Islamic architecture, Islamic geometric design here. This is the Imperial Chapel of Napoleon III in Biarritz. So there really was a time when it was in the 19th century when it was all the rage to reference Islamic architecture. On the right is a palace in Russia. Sorry, not in Russia, in the Crimea, I should say it properly. The Crimea used to be the playground of Russian aristocrats, and they built a lot of buildings that either had a room that was like a Moorish room or a Turkish room, or in this building, really using overt references to different eras. It's quite remarkable. Okay, so these are my chapters, and then I'm almost done now. So, and then I've got this illustrated glossary where I'm going to have a section on arches, a section on climate control, a section on Mukarnas, and a bunch of other things as well. I think probably about 10 or 15 entries. Something about the urban environment, something about Masharbiya. Just, you know, I envisage these as one page per topic, just trying to make this accessible in a concise way. And then lastly, I also would like to use a few illustrations like this. So the picture on the left, that's Najaf by an Ottoman artist. I think it's absolutely delightful, especially for architecture. You know, it's just, you can just zoom in as, and look at all the detail. The problem when you make a book is that you choose images and you just imagine that the images are all as big as your computer screen. But of course, in reality, when the book is put together, a book designer will make some photos big and some photos small. So I really, you know, sometimes as the author, you really have to fight your corner and say, and I think, no, this really has to be a big photo. So if this picture of Najaf ends up in the book, I would want it to be quite big, because the delight is really to be able that you can get up close and see these little details. Picture on the right is the Timur attacking the city of Urgench, Konya Urgench, and that's, I've written a little thing or about 1,500 words about that as well. Urgench is really the lost city in Islamic history. You know, it was a metropolis. It was one of the main cities in the world, and now, you know, there's hardly anything left. But at the time, it was extremely important, also architecturally. Okay, and then some illustrations. I'm doing a lot of illustrations, not as many as in my other books, but still, there's things I want to explain or make apparent. I've just put some pictures in there just to give you a flavor. I don't want to go into too much. I did an analysis on the right hand. That arch is of the is from the Mosque in Cordoba. So I've done a step-by-step instruction on how to draw that, just because it's well, because it's fun. The two patterns at the bottom are designs on the fountain in the Court of the Lions in the Alhambra. So I think something like that, people always, you look at the obvious things, but don't really look at some of the other details. So it's an opportunity for me to capture that and to show that. On the left are some Seljuk brickwork designs on the minaret, which I also wanted to capture. At this stage, I'm not really committing to colors yet, because colors get decided at the very end when the book is almost finished. So the colors are usually just for contrast at this stage. The thing in the middle is Egyptian. I think it's a really cool design. So I just thought, let me put that in there. Thing on the right is one of those super tall, great Seljuk minarets. So I think it's also nice to capture that brickwork design. And then I've done a bit on octagons. So just to give you an idea, the Alhambra famously, like pictures bottom left, bottom right, the Alhambra famously is almost all designed on the basis of a square root octagon. So if you look on the left, you can see one kind of octagon, a regular octagon, which is basically an octagon that sits in the middle of an 8-pointed star, right? The octagon on the right is different because all sides are not the same length. So the octagon on the right is the kind of octagon that's used in the Alhambra, and almost all of the proportions that are created in the Alhambra are just made from the square and the diagonal of a square. It's a very rich seam for getting proportions and dimensions. And then the octagons on the right are what they call Mughal octagons. So the Mughal architects had a system to keep complex things simple. And you can, well, hopefully the picture tells the story itself. So if the side of a regular octagon is 2, then from one side to the other it's 5. If the side of a regular octagon is 7, then from one side to the other it's 17. So rather than having to calculate and draw it, you just know, if you know these proportions, then it's a shortcut. Something else that I think I discovered, unless somebody shows me an article that already has it. So in Mughal architecture is very much influenced by Timurid architecture, of course, because the Timurids were started the Mughal Empire. You have buildings that have chamfered edges, right? They're square buildings with the edges cut off, chamfered, basically, if you will. If we assume that in Islamic architecture, just like as Islamic geometric design, there's nothing that's random, then there has to be a defined relationship between the long side and the short side, and nobody really ever knew what that was. I think it's this. You just make a grid of regular octagons, and that gives you the dimensions. So I tested that and it works. So picture on the right is the mausoleum of the Taj Mahal. Picture bottom right is Kargir Madrasa, famous Timurid building. So top left, you've got a grid of 2x2 octagons. Bottom, you've got a grid of 4x4 octagons. And Humayun's tomb, for example, is a grid of 3x3 octagons, in my opinion. So that's interesting to put in. Then I've also done something like this. Step-by-step instructions on how to draw an arch, for example. So it's hopefully useful. I've done something here. So this is in a Ilkhanate building. It has this enormous square Kufic panel on the right. So this photo you can see in different buildings, but nobody's really ever analyzed it. So I've had a go at that with some help. Trying to identify, so these are 66 of the 99 names of Allah. So I've tried to show how that works. So you start bottom right and then it goes in concentric circles into the center. So something like this is really worth doing, but it really took me a long time. It took me like a week. I'm still not finished. Anyway. So the other thing I also want to do, and I'm working with a Spanish 3D illustrator, is to show some buildings that no longer exist. Because of course we can only write about what we can see, but it's a shame to limit us. So top left is a reconstruction made in the Soviet era of the Friday Mosque of Samarkand, built by Timur. There's nothing left. But you know, if I can get a really good 3-dimensional illustration of that, I think it would be really valuable to have that. Bottom left is the Musalla of Herat. In Herat, there used to be, I think, 24 minarets. Well, and lots of fantastic buildings as well. So if we can do a 3D bird's eye view illustration to show that, I think it'll be really worth it. And then this, I love this photo. So if it's up to me, which it isn't, This is the photo I would probably put on the back of the book on the jacket. This is a drone photo, and I just, you know, you sort of think, well, what am I looking at? And of course, there's a big watermark in the middle, so you have to disregard that. But it's you know, people at prayer, isn't it? It's a completely full mosque. So I love that photo. So a publisher like Thames Hudson won't let me decide what goes on the cover of the book, nor will they let me decide the title for that matter. But I can try and nudge them in the right direction. Okay, so that's it basically. That's where I'm at. I'm you know, I'm working as hard as I can on this book because I've got 5.5 months to go. Hang on, I'm just turning off my screen share. And like I said, you know, I'm very aware that it's a privilege for me to write this book because I'm certainly not the person who knows most about Islamic architecture, certainly not. Nevertheless, you know, God's grace has given me this opportunity to write this book, so I have to do it as best as I can. That's it. So,
thank you, Eric. Thank you for that insightful presentation. And really, really, it's a pleasure to know that you're writing about women in Islamic architecture. It's long overdue. And we are also waiting for the stories behind each building to unfold. Now we know how far you go to procure each and every material and photos for your book. So wishing you the very best for the book launch and eagerly waiting to grab our copies.
Thank you.
Now, a question from me, personal question. I have 2 questions. One is regarding your book, and second is basic as an general topic as Islamic architecture. So the first question regarding Islamic architecture is, what is your suggestion that how we incorporate Islamic art and architecture as a part of a modern context with collaborating with advanced software and fabricating techniques to invent it as a part of a modern vocabulary without losing the essence or the spirit of the traditional design?
Yes, that's a very good question. I mean, it's a question that comes up a lot when I talk about Islamic geometric design. And it's, well, I think the starting point is to acknowledge that this is a very sophisticated and profound heritage, and it's not about the superficial, it's about the profound. And it's not about copying, it's not only about copying things that you can see, it's also how do I convey what it stands for, and how do I give it the content that traditionally it had. So for example, with Islamic geometric design, you know, we all know that in architecture nowadays, they like to use these patterns, but not in a way that would have passed quality control 200 years ago, sadly. And part of that is that if you think about it, these patterns are there for us to engage with. They're not just to give a bit of visual texture to a building, but it's to encourage anybody who walks past to spend more than 1 second and to think, well, what, you know, to reflect. Either reflect on what they're looking at or reflect on what it represents, or both. So that's really important. It's crucial. Otherwise, it's almost a pastiche, right? So, and this with Islamic architecture, it's about the purpose, isn't it? It's about the purpose. It's not even about the appearance. It's about the purpose. So, however that's achieved, in my opinion, is not even the most important thing. It's more, are you able to put in there what it needs to have, if that makes sense. But I think there's opportunities to embrace new technology for sure. Yeah, you can work bigger scale, you can use a visual heritage, but it's important to remember that innovation has always been an important part of Islamic architecture and also Islamic geometric design. You know, so it's not necessary just to be as faithful to copying what's already been done. It's more, you know, what opportunities are there for us to stay connected to that heritage, but still use our own creativity and technological skills to make something that's relevant for now.
Yes, true. That's always the question, how do you retain that essence or the spirit? Because just copying something superficially, it's a disservice, to be frank.
It does. That's right. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second question is that, will there be any topic in your book in which you'll be dealing with how the buildings and the natural lighting in a building, to be specific, and the treatment of the surfaces and pattern is tackled traditionally, like geographically how they have, done with it.
I don't know yet. I don't know yet, because when Thames Hudson, when my publisher got in touch with me, they were like, look, we want you to write a book for that's visual. We want you to write a book that appeals to designers and architects. So that's what I'm trying to do. But also, there's a huge general population that is also interested in the topic. So I have to strike a balance between. I don't want to get too technical, that's really it. So, for example, the section I'm doing on ventilation and climate control. The tricky bit is, how do I keep it interesting for everyone? That's the challenge, right? I don't want anybody's eyes to glaze over when they get hit over the head with jargon. It has to be a jargon-free book. It really has to be a jargon-free book. So that's my challenge. So I want it to be useful, but I also, it's striking that balance. How would anybody who doesn't know anything, how does somebody who is not an architect and has a superficial initial interest in Islamic architecture, how would I make sure that they read the 750 words I'm devoting to climate control? Because to get them to start reading, the picture has to be really good to get them curious. And then the first paragraph has to be interesting. Otherwise, they're like, oh my goodness, okay, next bit. Right. So that's that's the challenge. Yeah.
That's right. Probably you can, check for the next edition for architects on technical. I think we'll love to follow up on that.
Maybe, yes.
Okay, now we'll invite the audience to ask the questions directly or to write in the chat if they want to talk, or ask them to raise their hand. The floor is now open for questions. Please free to ask questions. Thank you, Eric. You'll be taking questions from the audience.
Okay.
Eric, I think we have questions in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So let me just go through them then. So it's something from Mr. Mohammed Banji. In the Africa section, are you planning to include or omit Swahili mosques, Kilwa, Tanzania? No, I'm not planning to omit. I'm planning to include. Kilwa Kiswani's probably it's hard because it depends on the quality of the photo that I can find, right? If I only had to make a selection based on what buildings are the most interesting or the most important or the most unusual, in a way it would be easier. But I've even thought about doing a 3D illustration, a bird's eye view illustration of Kilwa Kiswani in Tanzania, because it's so interesting. And also Zanzibar is interesting, if I can find a telling photo. So for sure, yeah, definitely East Africa gets a mention. I just have to choose very carefully. I found a very nice photo from, I think it's from Kilwa, of a stone mihrab with a stone minaret, or a 3-stepped minaret-like thing next to it. I just don't know whether the photo is nice. It's good enough. That's always the dilemma. It's always a dilemma. I see, sometimes I see a fantastic building on Instagram, for example. I think, oh, fantastic, I have to get that. And then I can spend the day trying to find a good photo and still not succeed. Next question is from Omema. My take on calligraphy as part of the architectural language. It's that the calligraphy is a sacred art and as such can not be used on certain places like carpets and chair upholstery. Well, I think that's probably true. I'm very aware also with calligraphy is that, and maybe this is just very subjective of me, but because there is so much calligraphy on buildings and around mihrabs and around entrances, it's for many, for lack of a better word, Western people, for many people who don't read Arabic or Persian, you just see, oh, there's some calligraphy around the entrance. But of course, this is meant to be read. So I'm really trying to make a point of trying to translate these things as much as I can. So for example, a good example of this is the fountain in the middle of the Court of the Lions in the Alhambra, which has these two illustrations which I showed on the slide. But around the rim of the whole fountain is a poem. Now, that's really fantastic. You know, that's something that I think should go in the book. Or if, for example, in Shaizinda in Samarkand, in the Acropolis there, all these mausolea, many of them with female patrons, have a lot of calligraphy on there. And it's not just the calligraphy or the meaning that you see most often, but also a lot of interesting things. And even Socrates is quoted on one of those mausolea in Samarkand. So yeah, no, I mean, calligraphy is very important in the book. I mean, I'm trying to do it justice, but essentially what the memo says is true. You know, it's a sacred art, and the places where it can be used is, in my experience, is limited. Let's have a look. Got something from Lata Jadav. Will the book explore on the different materials used to build these unique features? A little bit. I mean, I do want to talk about what I can't describe materials for many buildings because it would just get a bit boring and a bit samey. But there are some buildings where I can really make an interesting point. So, for example, there's a which building is that now? It's a building in Iran which uses some very unusual glaze colors. That then gives me an opportunity to make a bigger point about glazes and minerals and how these glazes influence that, and how, for example, terracotta bricks are carved. So I look for opportunities to make a bigger point using a small point, if you know what I mean. So yes, I do want to. I want to be as complete as possible, but not exhaustive. You know, I want people just to dip in and pick up little bits of information and give them a reason to pick up the book several times. Question from Khalid Al-Ansari. Can you show and briefly speak about the slide where you designed the arches? I can. Let me just, because I did that very quickly. Where's my thing? I just need to figure out how to get back to my presentation. Okay, let me just go. People can see this, presumably. Okay. So there are lots of different arches, and the interesting thing is also is that the pointed arch. Now, the Muslim world can take credit for that. You know, nowadays people say, "Oh, it's Gothic and this and that," but you know, it's, before it was Gothic, it was Islamic. Yeah, so there are many subtle proportions in arches, and I could do 20 versions, but I'm not going to. So you draw a cross. In this instance, you divide it into 10 equal sections. You take your compass, put your compass on the left in the circle. Make the radius so that it goes to the 7th thing there. Do the opposite on the other side. Take your compass, put your compass point in the little red circle, draw an arch, or draw 2 arches like that, or arcs, excuse me. Draw these lines. Draw these adjust your radius, draw these arcs, and hey presto. That's it. So in my book, I'm not doing any step-by-step instructions on Islamic geometric design because I've already done that. But I think for some constructions like the arch at in the mosque in Cordoba, that's interesting. I'm going to do at least one arch construction because it's, you know, it shows the principle of how that works. And a few other things as well, probably. Those octagons, how octagons make life easy, that's interesting as well. Yeah, so to answer your question, Khalid, yes, there are many variations of arches, many. A question from Jagannathan Sampat. I've been fascinated with mud mosques, handmade. Yes, there was a lot of mud mosques in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, and I've got one really great photo where these mosques, they have these pieces of timber sticking out the sides, and the reason those pieces of timber are there is so that these mosques can be maintained once every 2 years. They have or every year, I think, they have an annual mud festival, basically, where the whole community comes out, makes mud, and the young men climb up on the timber beams that protrude from the side so that they can reapply mud to the outside of the mosque. So over time, this mosque just gets fatter and fatter and fatter as more layers are added. But yeah, no, so that's, I'm doing a piece on mud mosques as well, but specifically in the area of Mali, Burkina Faso, that part of the world. Question from Amema, Eric, if you would like people to share their own photos, would that be acceptable for you? Yeah, well, I'm interested in photos, but I would, the thing is, a photo for a book has to be like 30 meg. It has to be a big photo, high resolution, big size. And not to say anything negative, but so when I was writing my book on Islamic geometric design, the challenge we had before we could even start was where the photos going to come from. And I showed my publisher my own photos because I have many, and they sort of delicately said to me, well, Eric, your photos are, you know, thank you, but they're practical but not beautiful. So basically that's the challenge, you know. How can I find, the photos have to be tip top, and not saying that all the participants here are not fantastic photographers, but it's tricky, you know. It's tricky enough to get visual consistency in the book because we've got 350 photos and 100 different photographers. I'm interested in photos from places that I can't find myself, and it happens, you know. So a good example is that mosque in Yemen, and there's other things where I'm well, not desperate, not yet anyway, to get specific photos of specific buildings, because if I don't, then I can't include that building and it'll be really sad. So don't volunteer your photos unless you really think that I must see it, because a lot of the buildings, I have a lot already, and there's maybe 5 or 10 buildings that I need to get, and I can't even name them now off the top of my head. So this is my polite way of declining. If that makes sense. Question from Mohammed Banji in Zanzibar, you may wish to look at the historic stone town. Yes, yes, indeed. Well, a lot of these fantastic, Zanzibar has some fantastic buildings, but more importantly to me, it has some fantastic doors, you know, and those doors, I really want to get a good one. I've got one nice photo, which I hope to include. Interest in the structure of the book. You say find stories more interesting than the minutiae of arches. It's true. I think, you know, like I said, I mean, I'm a historian of Islamic architecture, but I don't like to read these academic articles. I skip all the bits. Maybe that's just me, but I think, how interesting is it to have a building described to you if you can use a photo that does all that work for you, basically? And I think the stories are more interesting. You know, why would Timur commission the construction of a mausoleum to Sufi Saint X or Y? You know, that's interesting to me. Not, well, you know, how tall is the building is worth mentioning, and other things, and how it's decorated. But why would that happen? Or why are there so many female patrons of the mausolea in Samarkand, for example? Or yeah, many stories like that. So I find it more interesting to write, and I think people find it more interesting to read. That's why I'm doing it like that, really. Yes, so Mohammed Banji makes the point, the doors in Zanzibar are inspired by Omani architecture. Yeah, very much so. So that story, that connection between Oman and Zanzibar and the East Coast near Tanzania is very interesting. So those are the interesting stories, I think, because it's also an opportunity to give some information about Islamic history in general, but then connecting it to a building. I think that's a really attractive thing to do. And I find I give a lot of workshops on Islamic geometric design, and for many people who are not Muslim, for example, it's an opportunity for them to learn something almost by accident, because they come for something else, but then they get more information as well, because you can talk about a cultural or historical aspect. So that's too good an opportunity not to take, in my opinion.
Excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is, thank you for the presentation, Eric, and I want to ask you some questions, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
In your presentation, you decided to make the structure of the book by the geographic region,
Yeah.
Africa, Asia. Would you consider also to organize it by the era where the mosque or the mausoleum were constructed? Let's say, for example, you mentioned mosque in K1. It was built since 14th century. So there is a big difference between what's built for more than 1,000 years and the recent mosques. This is number one. Number two, also the book have plenty of photos. Will you consider to make enrich it by some plans, some sections, some sketches also, because as I know, you can make some comparison between different styles of the mosques by.
Yeah. No, I do. I mean, the first point about the structure of the book, the structure is by region, the substructure is by era. So it's divided by, like I said, by region, but then within that it's chronological. So the era after era, dynasty after dynasty. That's the structure. So I think that's the most sensible way to do it. I will be doing a few cross sections, for example, to show, I don't know, how a Timurid mausoleum is constructed with a very tall outer dome shell and a much smaller inner dome shell, for example, or to do a cross section of the Dome of the Rock, or to do a bird's eye view of the Tokapi Palace, for example, where you can name everything. I'm not planning to do plans because I think they don't really have a lot of visual strength unless you're an architect and you find it interesting to look at these things in great detail. So it's a bit of a funny story, actually, because I had to fight with my publisher to get a budget for an illustrator, because I can do illustrations but only 2D, and I can't do 3D, but I want 3D. So I was looking online to see if I could find somebody who could do 3D illustrations in the way that I want, and I found this Spanish guy who's really good. So I sent a few of his photos and his work to my publisher, saying, "Look, this is the guy I want us to make illustrations." But he does a lot of illustrations in the style of games, so and the style of Pixar. So I said, "Look, I want it to be like Pixar, but not cute, basically." But then the publisher was like, the trick is to find somebody who can. I really want super high quality illustrations that really show also what's possible in the 21st century. But what the publisher doesn't want is have illustrations that look like photos, well, because they think it's going to be confusing or ambiguous. So I will do illustrations. I will do sketches. I think I'll probably have 25 3D illustrations and maybe 100 2D illustrations that I do. I have to judge very carefully what am I going to do. Yeah? So for example, I want to do the Musalla in Herat. I want to do the Friday Mosque in Samarkand. I want to do Fatehpur Sikri, probably. That'll be interesting as a 3D bird's eye view illustration. And a few cross sections of buildings, but more to make a general point than a specific point. And the Dome of the Rock, or yeah, the whole area there I would want to do. Yeah. It depends on budget as well, to a certain extent. Anybody else?
We can take one more question. I think there's one more question in the chat.
Oh yeah, from Fatima. How do you think I can be useful in this field as an architect student in Iran? And how can I have something new to say in contemporary architecture? How? How's a good question. Think about that. I mean, like we discussed, I think the real value comes in understanding that it's not just the superficial aspect of architecture, and I'm sure you would know that, Fatima, that it's, you know, Islamic architecture is profound, and change for change's sake or innovation for innovation's sake is also not that important, but it's more how can you, for example, take something that's recognizably part of the heritage of Islamic architecture or architecture in Iran and give that a profound meaning in a new way. So an example that I really like, for example, in Iran, and maybe it seems very mundane, is the theater in Tehran. That is like a cylindrical building with the arches on the outside. Now, for me, because I know a bit about Islamic architecture, I can see where the architect got his reference points from, because, you know, it's very typical for tomb structure or tomb design in Iran, but then interpreted in a new way. And that's just an example that comes to my head, and there's others like that. It's more, and the example I showed for Ricardo Bofill, you know, building that building in Algiers and really doing the most minimalist version possible of Islamic architecture with squares and circles. I think it's really brave. I think it's really clever. But everybody has to find their own way, right? I mean, it's if you want to say something new in the contemporary architecture, it's going to be a process of you thinking hard about these things and you know, doing 10 things wrong and doing one thing right, I guess. I mean, like any creative venture, I think. If that makes sense. It's not easy, right? I mean, it's hit and miss.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for sharing the process as well. It's an absolute privilege and an honor to have you with us. And all the audiences, thank you for your time to join us, and hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Over to you, Slim. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you, Eric. I want to thank you also all the attendees for their participation and their enrichment in the chat. We are impatient to have your book between our hands, Eric.
It'll take a while.
Like and hope to see you here. We need to get a signature from your book here in Doha. Thanks, everyone, and stay safe. Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.